Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Ontario, Canada on July 3rd, 2025 for Reason to Resist. Yesterday, Iran's president signed a law which, according to Iranian state media, suspended cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA. Following this announcement, Germany's foreign ministry condemned Iran, stating, Iran's decision to suspend cooperation with the IAEA sends a devastating message. It eliminates any possibility of international oversight of the Iranian nuclear program, which is crucial for a diplomatic solution. Iran must reverse this decision. This prompted a fiery response from Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi. Yesterday, the Iranian foreign minister took to social media to clarify that despite this law, quote, Iran remains committed to the NPT and its safeguards agreement in accordance with the new legislation by Majlis, that's the Iranian parliament, sparked by the unlawful attacks against our nuclear facilities by Israel and the US. Our cooperation with IAEA will be channeled through Iran's Supreme National Security Council for obvious safety and security reasons. Iran's foreign minister then eviscerated the German government, writing, to Iranians, what truly sends a devastating message and destroys a diplomatic solution is very obvious. Germany's explicit support for Israel's unlawful attack on Iran, including safeguarded nuclear sites, as dirty work carried out on behalf of the West. Germany also shamefully supported the unlawful U.S. attack against Iranian nuclear facilities, which violated international law, the NPT, and the UN Charter. Germany's repudiation of its JCPOA commitments by openly demanding zero enrichment in Iran. And the Iranians were already put off by Germany's Nazi-style backing of genocide in Gaza and its support for Saddam's war in Iran by providing materials for chemical weapons. To my knowledge, the German government has yet to respond to that rather robust retort. Now, all of this comes in the wake of damning revelations about the head of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, and the IAEA's apparent collusion with the Trump and Netanyahu regimes. One journalist who has done a great deal to expose this collusion is Kit Klarenberg. Kit is an investigative journalist exploring the role of intelligence services in shaping politics and perceptions. He writes frequently for The Gray Zone, but also for other important alternative media outlets. And he joins us today from Belgrade, Syria. Thank you for coming on to Reason to Resist, Kit.
My pleasure. Belgrade, Serbia. I'm not quite in Syria yet, but I mean the knockings of regime change are in the air. So maybe it's more opposite than you intended. But thank you for having me on.
I certainly intended to say Serbia if I said Syria. I must have Syria on the brain at the moment. My apologies.
Yeah. I think a lot of us do.
Yes. In any case, Kit, this week, independent media have published investigative reports you've authored about the IAEA's dealings with Western intelligence agencies. The first was published on the Gray Zone website on July 1st and was titled Spying on Iran, How MI6 Infiltrated the IAEA. And the second was published by the Cradle on July 2nd and was titled The IAEA's Mosaic Weapon, Predictive Espionage and the War on Iran. Now, before I ask you about your reports, I thought we could give some useful context to our audience. For well over a decade, the IAEA has engaged in highly intrusive oversight of Iran's nuclear program. Could you describe for us the nature and extent of that oversight and the opportunities it created for the IAEA to gather invaluable intelligence about Iran's nuclear program?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I mean, you mentioned my piece for the Cradle. I made the point in that the in May 2015, which is 2 months before the Obama administration inked its deal with the Islamic Republic for oversight and inspection of its nuclear sites, the Palantir powered tool Mosaic was adopted by the IAEA. Now, this is a tool that was fashioned by Palantir, the notorious kind of global spying firm. It would be an understatement to say that they're kind of like Bond villain-esque in terms of their reach and the extent to which their tendrils extend into so many spheres of public and private life throughout the West. The Mosaic is adopted by the IAEA in May 2015, and then 2 months later you have this deal between the Obama administration and Iran for sanctions relief. Now, the IAEA inspection agreement with Iran was absolutely unprecedented in the organization's history, and it accounted for a significant proportion of the association's work. The then head of the association, Yukiya Amano, he boasted in March 2018 that like half of the total number of images that we collect throughout the world flow from Iran, because the IAEA set up surveillance cameras in all of Iran's nuclear facilities. Like, they were engaged in wide-ranging spying operations, which eclipsed anything they'd done previously. And so we have to ask ourselves, like, was the ultimate purpose of this laying the foundations for conflict and gathering intelligence for war? I've written for my website, Global Delinquents, KitKlarenberg.com, shameless plug. Sorry about that. That there is a extensive and deeply deplorable history of UN-affiliated organizations like the IAEA, but also the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, of fomenting conflict rather than trying to stop it or limit it. And so it's also important to bear in mind, as I document in my Grey Zone investigation, that what led the steps leading to the JCPOA, as you mentioned, the Obama administration agreement, was between 2010 and 2012. The US, the UN, the EU, and multiple international governments, typically US vassals like Japan and South Korea, they leveled a very high number of sanctions and financial penalties towards the Islamic Republic, allegedly due to Iran's nuclear ambitions. Now, this time frame, 2010 to 2012, which kind of tapers off with the EU cutting Iran out of SWIFT, which was like a huge move at the time, it overlaps perfectly with a veteran MI6 dirty trickster called Nicholas Langman working for Britain's Counter-Proliferation Centre. And in an official CV of Langman, which is buried in this kind of trove of papers related to a British intelligence cutout called Torchlight, which has activities all over the world and is engaged in skullduggery, like training repressive police and security forces in the use of GCHQ's J-Trig dirty tricks. This was the precise period that Langman was running the Counter-Proliferation Centre, and he takes credit for sanctions that arose over Iran's alleged nuclear program as a result. Now, of course, the JCPOA was shredded by Trump in May 2018 and replaced with a maximum pressure campaign, which has basically remained in place ever since. The Biden administration reportedly considered reversing it, but then they just doubled down. And so, yeah, again, the question arises, was the ultimate end goal always to foment conflict? And if that's the case, then at the core of this have been clandestine efforts by a very disreputable MI6 officer, as if there could be any other kind, to foment fears and anxieties and hysteria over Iran's alleged nuclear program.
Right. Your article about this MI6 character discloses some rather salacious detail about his past and how he originally came to the public's attention. Could you tell us about Langman's unsavory history?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's quite remarkable, actually. It's like, it's very rare for like CIA or MI6 operatives to get burned in the way that he has. But first, in 2001, the investigative journalist and historian Stephen Dorrell, who wrote an excellent book about the history of MI6, which is just called MI6, I think, he exposed how Langman arrives in Paris, France, mere weeks before Princess Diana suffers a fatal car crash in that city in late August 1997. And then subsequently, I'm sure this is just a coincidence, Langman is charged with overseeing information operations to deflect widespread public speculation that British intelligence was responsible for her death. Now, after that, he's spirited out of Paris. He runs a number of MI6 desks the world over. In 2005, he ends up in Greece, Athens, and he is formally accused that year by government officials in Greece and also local media of overseeing the torture and abduction of 28 Pakistani guest workers in Athens. And they were allegedly suspected of having contact with individuals who were accused of carrying out the July 7th, 2005 bombings in London. I mean, that's, a very thorny issue we might need to have an entire other episode to talk about. But the point is that these Pakistanis were brutally tortured. Greek media openly accused him of being complicit in this. The British media refused to name him due to a official gag order, and he was then spirited out of Athens and then ends up running MI6's Iran desk back in London. And his CV boasts about how he was behind a global campaign to pressure Iran to end its nuclear program. And it talks about his collaboration with US and Middle Eastern, which is to say Mossad, intelligence agencies, in getting behind this notion that Iran had nuclear weapons ambitions. So, I mean, talk about failing upwards.
Yes, indeed. Now, your piece regarding Langman says at the very end that the IAEA had not responded to an email from the Gray Zone seeking clarification on its relationship with this sordid intelligence agent. Has there been any further? Is there any further update in that regard? Have you received any response, or have you learned anything more in the interim about Langman's relationship with the IAEA, or does the agency continue to be silent?
Well, I mean, we have nudged them. Particularly given that this investigation blew up, which was well received by us, but no, we've not heard anything, and I think that, but more generally, I actually wrote something again. Shameless plug for my website about how UN-affiliated, supposedly neutral intergovernmental organizations have an extensive history of effectively serving as intelligence gatherers for Western powers. I mean, we look at Kosovo, say, where in the late 1990s you have the Kosovo Liberation Army, which is this CIA, MI6, Al-Qaeda connected militant group, which is carrying out a purge of Kosovo, which was at that time a key province of Yugoslavia, carrying out a purge of its non-Albanian population and disappearing Serbs and Roma and Slavic Muslims, Bosniaks, etc. The Yugoslav authorities' crackdown on the KLA escalated into all-out war. The result of this was an agreement by Belgrade and the UN to reach a ceasefire. Now, under the terms of that ceasefire, you have the Operation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. They created a dedicated Kosovo verification mission to keep an eye on Belgrade's compliance with the ceasefire operation. The subsequent media reports indicate that the KVM was a CIA front, and what they were doing was collecting coordinates and information and very detailed intelligence on Yugoslav army barracks and military installations, which they would hand to NATO and the KLA in order to assist their war efforts. And they were instrumental in the March to June 99 bombing of Yugoslavia. Again, you mentioned that Iran has, quite sensibly moved to ban the IAEA from operating on its soil. Other countries, of which there are a great many, which are subject to IAEA inspections, would be wise to follow Tehran's lead. Because the likelihood that very sensitive information which could assist with war will be gathered is very, very high. And you also have, the broader issue of the fact that, when you open sensitive installations or sites or territory to supposedly ostensibly neutral organizations, that information may, one way or another, be passed on. Now, this is something else I've written about both for the Cradle and again my personal website, is that behind the Iran nuclear deal, a core component of the verification of Iran's adherence to this deal was Mosaic, which is a tool created by Palantir, this notorious kind of global spying giant, and Palantir modeled Mosaic on its predictive policing programs, which are used by an unknown number of law enforcement agencies the Western world over. And so, it's not much of a leap to suggest, perhaps that predictive power was applied to data fed into the IAEA, and it may have informed Israel's strike of June 13th and the beginning of the failed 12-day war against Iran.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to go back to the first of those points you made regarding how other states are likely to react, I think this is what one could regard as a classic case of blowback, where the co-option of this important regulatory agency, the IAEA, is actually going to end up increasing the risk of nuclear proliferation, something which presumably the United States government, if it's at all sane, would desperately want to avoid and claims to want to avoid. But of course, you're quite right, Kit. Why would anybody trust this organization when it is now colluding with people who are engaged in war crimes and crimes against humanity on a daily basis? I want to go back to Palantir. Could you tell us about the origin of this corporation? Who runs it? Who funded it? How did it come into being?
Yeah, sure. So, Palantir was founded by Peter Thiel, who he is someone who profited handsomely from the creation of PayPal, and ever since has lined his pockets via government contract. Palantir creates a vast number of data aggregation tools, and data aggregation is kind of downplays how sinister this all is, and it basically allows multiple government agencies to combine information on individuals and groups in one centralized resource. They have, for instance, a tool called Gotham, which was it was honed on the battlefields of the war on terror, and it was used to plan movements and operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. It collates this extraordinary volume of information from different sources in one place, and it has a predictive aspect to it. It collates information on, as I say, individuals, including their sex, their race, their name, identifying attributes such as tattoos, their known addresses, photos of them, etc. And so this was one of the predictive policing tools that informed Mosaic. And this was reported on by Bloomberg in May 2018, mere days before the Trump administration shredded the JCPOA and replaced it with this maximum pressure campaign on Tehran. And that is the origin, of these tools, and it's spelled out in black and white in mainstream media reporting. Now, I don't have the evidence, so I won't go that far. But it's like, you got to bear in mind that, as the dust settled on the 12-day war, it is very clear it was a complete disaster for Israel and the US. Like, Israel bit off more than it could chew. It entered into a conflict it had no chance of finishing, let alone winning. And within days, the US had to come to the rescue. Now, in that intervening time, just about the only success that Israel can claim of this operation is that several nuclear scientists and IRGC commanders were killed. But then you also have the murder, seemingly targeted assassination of individuals who were involved in Iran's tech sphere. And it's like, well, I mean, were they tagged by Mosaic, i.e. Palantir, as a potential threat, even if they hadn't done anything? Because yeah, like, as I say, the tools upon which Mosaic is based are quote unquote pre-crime, like Minority Report.
Right. Now, your report about Palantir talks about the criticisms of the MIT Technology Review of this type of predictive technology. Why has, and I understand from your article that the MIT Technology Review has flat out called for their abolition. Why has it done that? What's the critique?
Well, I mean, MIT are well worth looking at, and I think that one of the really amusing aspects of, even though it was horrific, the overall, like, one of the amusing aspects of the 12-day war is that we had a lot of guides from the mainstream media about why Israel's much vaunted Iron Dome doesn't work. You can find essays by MIT from 10 years ago saying it's useless. So, they have their ear to the ground and they know what they're talking about. But it's like the reason that Palantir's predictive model is so controversial is that it has a number of biases embedded within it. So it's like, if you're looking for, if you're going to go the predictive policing route, then fundamentally it's going to be based on data on pre-existing crimes that happened in the past. So police are going to end up patrolling and looking for crimes in places where they previously happened, rather than where they might happen in the future. Now, that Bloomberg article I mentioned, it quoted back from May 2018, so it was very prescient. It notes the fact that, fundamentally, predictive analysis systems are vulnerable to corruption by accident or design, because if you feed false data into it, or your objective is based on a false assumption, then it's going to produce false results. Now, I made this point very loudly and clearly in my investigation, which is, if you feed the false assumption into Mosaic that Iran is determined to develop a nuclear weapon, in spite of all evidence to the contrary, in spite of the fact that there was a 2004, I believe, US national intelligence estimate which stated that Iran had no interest in developing nuclear weapons. This was reached again and again and again over many years subsequently, and was apparently shared by Mossack. If you contravene that and feed into the system, Iran is seeking a nuclear weapon, it's going to find any evidence that supports that conclusion. Now, as I have written about multiple times, there was Israel published an intelligence dossier which concluded that Iran was at the point of no return in acquiring nukes. It was heavily informed by a May 2025, i.e. this year, report from the IAEA, which concluded that Iran may be in breach of its nuclear obligations under the NPT. It was based entirely on information from the early 2000s, right? So it's like, yeah, like, well, we're looking for this false result. Well, let's find this false evidence. Okay, well, Iran might have been developing a nuclear weapon, nearly 25 years ago. That gives us a pretext to intervene.
Right, right. Your article also references some previously confidential documents that were obtained by Iran and published by the Iranian state broadcaster Press TV. I believe it was on June 12th.
Yes.
The documents are primarily in Hebrew. What in essence do they reveal, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, a lot has been made of these documents by certain elements of the kind of independent alt media. Based on what's been shared so far, I don't think that broad conclusions can be drawn based on them. But it is quite clear that the names and other identifying information of Iranian nuclear scientists was previously provided to Israel by the IAEA. And then we have, Emmanuel Grossi in direct contact with Israeli representatives to the IAEA, of which they're not even members. So it's quite clear that there was some degree of collaboration and collusion from a very early stage. These documents, in some cases, date back to 2016. I'm not drawing massive conclusions from them, but at the same time, it's like, it is no surprise that Iranian lawmakers have unanimously moved to ban or suspend indefinitely all cooperation with the association, because they are pretty damning. Mm-hmm. You have Grossi, who at that time was not the chief of the IAEA. He was just the Argentina's representative to the organization. He's directly communicating and coordinating with Israel. So there is a significance there. It's not as damning as has been concluded in certain quarters of the independent media, but it's something to look out for. And as far as I can tell, there is a lot more to come out. So do keep your eyes peeled in terms of what's released. But fitting into this wider milieu, for want of a better word, of where you have, as I reported on for the Grey Zone, you have a veteran MI6 dirty tricks operative who is charged with garnering international support for sanctions against Iran over their alleged nuclear program, and his tenure in this position overlaps with mass international government action against Iran because of their alleged nuclear program. That is enough from my perspective to conclude that the IAEA is compromised to a dangerous degree.
Right. And lastly, I can't help but ask you, Kit, because I have you available to put the question to you. Back in May of 2023, disgracefully, the British counterterrorism police interrogated you upon your return to your home country from Belgrade, Serbia. Has there been any further if you're able to say, and you may not be in a position to say this, have you had any further unpleasant interactions with the counterterrorism police, or have they pretty much left you alone since then?
Well, I've barely left Serbia since. So, I've not had any. I find all forms of travel actually quite, anxiety inducing and fraught since then. But it must be stressed that the experience of a lot of people since then has been considerably worse. I always thought, because when my stop happened and my detention happened, I thought at the time that the British state wasn't expecting such a massive backlash. And you got to bear in mind, I was invited on mainstream US news networks to talk about what happened to me at the time because it was so shocking. And I thought that might be a deterrent to further action against other people. No, it's just ratcheted. My dear friend David Miller, an academic and journalist, he's been stopped repeatedly and detained for many hours, had his digital devices gone over. Craig Murray, the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan turned whistleblower, he's been stopped and detained, had his digital devices taken from him. Richie Medhurst, this independent journalist based in Vienna, born in Britain, he got arrested coming off a plane in Heathrow. So it continues and continues. And there, I heard recently a recording of a radio show where this Australian described his experience of getting stopped at the border in the US, where despite the fact that he'd cleaned his social media in advance of arriving and had removed Palestine solidarity posts and posts critical of Trump, got held for 12 hours before being sent back and had his phone, all of his phone's data downloaded and God knows what put on his phone. It seems like I was a test case, and the fact that they got away with it seems to encourage authorities more. I'm very happy where I am. I have very little desire to go back to my country of birth. It does suck that there are relatives of mine who are on their deathbeds I'm never going to see again, and there are weddings and birthdays of my dear friends I can't attend. But I don't want to go through what I went through again. So, or worse, which seems to be the trajectory that I'm on. So, it swings and roundabouts, I guess.
Well, I'm sure I speak for many people in our audience when I say we much appreciate the fact that you've remained committed to effective journalism and continue to do the great work that you do. And thank you very much for coming on our program today. And I hope we'll have opportunities to discuss these developments in the future.
Absolutely, Dimitri. Thanks so much for having me on, brother. Take care. God bless you. And God bless the audience.
Peace out. Thank you.
Peace out.